She was just trying to comfort a crying boy on the playground until a man in a tailored coat appeared beside her, his face pale, his eyes locked on her toddler. "Where did you get that child?" he asked, voice trembling. She clutched her son closer, heart racing. The man wasn't angry, he was stunned. Because the boy in her arms looked exactly like his own son, and he had never met her before in his life. It was a chilly Saturday afternoon in early October, the kind that made your breath visible in little clouds and turned city parks into mosaics of fallen leaves. Julia Ross sat on a worn wooden bench near the edge of the playground, holding her 2-year-old son Max on her lap. She gently zipped his tiny jacket up to his chin and pulled the knit hat snug over his ears. His nose was already pink from the cold, but he didn't seem to care. He was too busy pointing at every dog, bird, or passing leaf like it was the most incredible thing in the world. Julia was tired, more emotionally than physically. The kind of tired that made you smile politely when someone asked how you were, then break down in the bathroom when no one was looking. Life hadn't been kind lately. After leaving her controlling husband 6 months ago, she had moved across the state to start over with nothing but 2 suitcases, a toddler, and a vague sense of hope. They were now living in a rented room above a retired librarian's garage. The space was cramped, but it was quiet, safe. That alone made it feel like luxury. She glanced down at Max, who was chewing on the corner of a biscuit she'd packed from home. He looked up and gave her a crumb-covered grin that made her chest ache. No matter how hard things got, he was her anchor, the reason she kept going. As she stood to guide Max toward the sandbox, a child's cry rang out from the other side of the playground. It was sharp, scared, and instantly recognizable to any parent. Julia instinctively turned and saw a little boy, maybe 5 or 6, standing near the climbing structure, holding his scraped knee and sobbing. He was alone. Without hesitation, she picked Max up and rushed over. Hey, it's okay," she said gently, kneeling beside the crying boy. "Did you fall?" The boy nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. Blood trickled from his knee, not much, but enough to frighten him. "Can I take a look? I have tissues." He nodded again, sniffling. Julia handed Max his toy to distract him and pulled a small pack of wipes from her bag. As she gently cleaned the wound, she kept talking, low, calm, reassuring. "What's your name, sweetie?" "Owen," he managed between hiccups. "Well, Owen, that was a pretty brave fall. You're doing great." She wrapped the cut with a tissue and kissed her fingers, then tapped them lightly over the bandaged knee. "Magic seal," she said with a small smile. Owen actually laughed a little. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Julia turned. A tall man in a dark overcoat and scarf stood there, looking down at them with relief in his eyes and a kind of stunned silence. "Dad!" Owen cried, leaping forward and grabbing the man's leg. The man knelt to embrace his son. "I'm sorry, buddy. I only turned for a second." He looked at Julia. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if—" "It's fine," she said quickly, brushing her hair back. "He just scraped his knee. I have a little one too, so, you know." Only then did he glance at Max, who was standing beside her now, holding on to her jeans and blinking curiously at the stranger. And something flickered in the man's face. Subtle, but noticeable. Julia saw it too. The man froze for half a second, his eyes locked on Max with something she couldn't quite define. Recognition? Shock? Max blinked at him, then giggled and pointed at a pigeon. The man stood up, composed himself, and held out his hand. "Ethan Ward," he said. "That was incredibly kind of you." "Julia Ross," she replied, shaking his hand. "Nice to meet you, Julia." There was a brief silence. "Would you mind if I bought you a coffee? As a thank you?" he added, voice hesitant, like he wasn't used to offering favors to strangers. Julia hesitated. No expectations. Just appreciation. She looked at Max, who had already begun walking toward the nearest patch of leaves, and then back at Ethan. "Okay," she said. "Sure." And as they walked toward the cafe across the street, 2 strangers with 2 little boys, neither of them realized that this small, accidental moment would unravel everything they thought they knew about their past. The cafe was warm and smelled like cinnamon and dark roast coffee. Julia walked in with Max on her hip, his small hand clutching her collar as his eyes scanned the pastry display with sleepy curiosity. Ethan held the door for them, his son Owen now calm, his scraped knee forgotten. They chose a table by the window, a corner booth that offered enough space for two toddlers, and the awkwardness of two adults unsure of what they were doing. Julia sat Max down and handed him a cracker from her bag, while Ethan ordered drinks, coffee for them, apple juice for the boys, and a blueberry muffin he split between the two kids. As Ethan returned with the tray, Julia caught herself watching him more closely than before. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man used to control, but not in an arrogant way. There was something heavy in his gaze, too, like someone who carried things he didn't talk about. She recognized that weight. She carried it, too. "So," he said as he slid into the seat across from her, "is this your usual park?" She gave a soft laugh. "We've only lived in this neighborhood for a few weeks. It's the only one within walking distance. Max loves the ducks." "Smart kid," Ethan said, smiling as he glanced at Max, who was now focused on smearing muffin crumbs into his juice. "What about you?" Julia asked. "You live nearby?" He nodded. "A couple of blocks away. We come to the park most weekends. Owen's always climbing something he shouldn't. Today was the bench. Yesterday it was the monkey bars." Julia smiled. "Boys." "Exactly." A pause settled between them, long enough for Julia to feel it. Then he added more quietly, "It's just the two of us. His mom passed away a few years ago." Julia blinked, surprised by his openness. "I'm sorry." "Thanks. It's been a journey." He sipped his coffee, his eyes not meeting hers for a moment. "I didn't mean to say that like a sympathy trap. Just context." "No, it's okay," she said gently. "I get it." He looked up at her, brows raised slightly. "I left Max's father when he was a baby. It wasn't safe. He hasn't seen him since." Ethan nodded slowly, taking that in. "I'm glad you got out. That's not easy." Julia didn't reply right away. She watched Max rub apple juice on his sleeve and smiled faintly. "No, it's not." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. It felt like the kind of silence that came from two people who understood brokenness. Then Ethan said something she didn't expect. "I know this might sound strange, but your son, Max, he looks a lot like Owen did at his age." Julia's spine straightened just slightly. "Really?" "Yeah," he said, his tone careful. "The curls, the eyes, even that little birthmark under his ear." Her hand instinctively brushed Max's cheek. She gave a polite smile, but she could feel something unfamiliar settling in her chest. Not fear, not suspicion. Something more like unease. A coincidence, surely. Children often looked alike. Still, she found herself saying, "They do look a bit similar." Ethan nodded again but said nothing more. He changed the subject, asked about her work, if she had family in the city, what kind of toys Max liked. He was easy to talk to, and Julia found herself relaxing again, despite that flicker of uncertainty. Eventually, the boys started getting restless. Max was yawning. Owen had begun drawing with a coffee stirrer on the table. "We should probably head back," Julia said, standing and gathering her bag. "Of course," Ethan replied, also rising. "Would you mind if I gave you my number? In case you ever need anything? A sitter, a job lead, or just someone to talk to?" She hesitated, then nodded. He scribbled his number on a napkin and handed it to her. "Thanks again, Julia, for helping Owen." "Anytime," she said, balancing Max on her hip. As she walked out into the crisp afternoon air, something about the way Ethan had looked at her son stayed with her. Not in a threatening way, not even inappropriate, but thoughtful, puzzled, familiar. She looked down at Max, who was now asleep against her shoulder. "Just a coincidence," she whispered to herself. But deep inside, something told her it might be more than that. The next few days passed quietly, but not without weight. Julia couldn't stop thinking about the coffee shop encounter, more specifically, the way Ethan had looked at Max. It wasn't just a passing remark about a resemblance. It had felt more deliberate, more personal, like he was looking for something in her child's face and had almost found it. She tucked the napkin with his number into her wallet but didn't use it. She told herself she had no reason to. Ethan had been kind, respectful, grateful, but part of her, a part she had learned to trust after too many bruises, whispered to be cautious. Life had taught her that when something seemed too good, there was usually a reason. Still, curiosity gnawed at her. She Googled him. Ethan Ward, CEO of Bright Path Schools, widowed, one son. The internet was full of clean-cut press photos and interviews in polished offices. He was well known in local philanthropic circles, especially for expanding access to early childhood education. There were photos of him with politicians, community leaders, even celebrities, and a few personal ones. Him with Owen at a fundraiser, the boy holding a balloon, smiling wide. Julia stared at the screen longer than she meant to. The resemblance was real. Max and Owen had the same eyes, same chin, same curl pattern. She tried to brush it off. Genetics could be strange, but she couldn't shake it. Later that week, she took Max back to the same park. Not because she expected to see Ethan, but because Max had asked to see the ducks again. It was warm that day, unusual for October, and the park was busier. She kept scanning the area instinctively, her eyes drifting toward the benches near the climbing structure. And then there he was, Ethan, sitting on the same bench, laptop open on his knees, Owen beside him with a juice pouch and a stack of toy cars. He looked up the moment Julia entered the clearing, his expression flickering from focused to pleasantly surprised. He closed the laptop and stood. "Julia," he called casually, as if they ran into each other all the time. She walked over, Max's tiny hand wrapped around her fingers. "Hi," she said. "Didn't expect to see you again." "Same," he said, smiling. "But I'm glad." Owen spotted Max and leapt off the bench. "Hey, it's the baby with the giggle," he exclaimed. Max giggled on cue. The boys were soon playing together, piling leaves and racing each other around the swings. Julia and Ethan stood nearby, watching them. "They seem to like each other," he said. "They do," she agreed. "Max doesn't warm up to other kids easily." "Neither does Owen," Ethan added. "He's very particular. Always has been." Julia nodded. The silence between them was more comfortable this time. Then Ethan glanced at her, his expression a little more serious. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've been thinking about our conversation the other day." She turned slightly toward him, cautious again. "Okay," he continued slowly. "It's just that resemblance between our boys. It's uncanny. And I know it's probably nothing, but—" Julia cut him off gently. "You think Max could be related to you somehow?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Owen, who had just burst into laughter chasing a leaf Max threw. "There's something about him that feels familiar," Ethan admitted, "and I can't explain it." Julia stayed silent. Then he looked at her and said, "This might sound crazy, but is there any chance you and I have met before? Years ago? Even briefly?" Julia blinked. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "No," she said. "I don't think so." But the way she said it wasn't entirely convincing. Because something about Ethan's voice, his manner, even his eyes, it had struck her somewhere deep, too. She just hadn't let herself consider it. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, backing off. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just— sometimes grief messes with your head. You start looking for answers that aren't there." She nodded slowly. "I get it. Really." They let it go. For now. The boys played until the sky began to fade to orange, and the chill returned to the air. As they parted, Ethan said softly, "If you ever feel like talking, the number still works." Julia smiled faintly. "Good to know." But that night, as she watched Max sleep, his face half lit by the soft glow of the hallway light, she whispered something she hadn't meant to say aloud. "Did I meet him before you were born?" She stared at the ceiling, heart racing, questions echoing louder than ever. The following morning began like any other. Julia woke to Max babbling softly to himself, sitting upright in his crib and playing with a stuffed giraffe. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, casting thin golden lines across the modest studio apartment. It was quiet still, too still for the weight sitting in her chest. She moved through the motions. Breakfast, dressing Max, wiping jelly off his chin, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she looked at him now, she saw a ghost of something she hadn't wanted to name until now. Familiarity, and not the maternal kind. The kind she saw reflected in Ethan Ward's eyes. That question he'd asked the day before kept echoing. "Is there any chance you and I have met before?" She had said no, but that hadn't been the full truth. After Max's nap, Julia pulled out an old cardboard box from the back of her closet. It was covered in layers of duct tape and dust, labeled only with a faded red marker. Before. She hadn't opened it since the night she'd fled from her ex-husband's house, nearly 2 years ago. Back then, she'd crammed inside anything that didn't scream of trauma, old photos, college papers, letters she couldn't throw away. She pulled off the tape and started sifting. A few birthday cards, a worn planner, a photo strip from a college fair, a dusty envelope with her name in a handwriting she didn't recognize at first. But then it hit her. It was from Emma Ward, her old professor. Julia stared at the name for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "Julia, I know you're scared, but if you ever decide to go through with it, I'll be here. Quietly, no judgment. You have options. You are not alone." It had been written in late 2020 during Julia's second year at the community college. She remembered now, Emma had been more than a teacher to her. She had mentored her through a painful decision, whether or not to continue a surprise pregnancy that had shaken Julia's world. She had never told Emma who the father was. Not exactly. But Emma had asked her once, gently, "Was it someone from school?" And Julia had said only, "No, someone I met just once." And it was true one night, a charity event Emma had invited her to attend. She had gone in Emma's place to help staff the registration table. She remembered working beside a tall man with kind eyes and a slightly tired voice. She didn't remember his name then, but she remembered his warmth, his quiet sense of humor, the way his hand brushed hers when they reached for the same pen. They talked for maybe 20 minutes. Later that night, they had crossed paths again near the elevator. One drink, one conversation that turned into three. One kiss that she hadn't expected. One night that felt safe. And then, nothing. They hadn't exchanged names, but now she knew who it was. It had been Ethan. She dropped the envelope onto the bed, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She stood and looked over at Max, who was now coloring in a tiny sketchbook. She remembered how, when Max was born, she had refused to put a father's name on the birth certificate. She had told the nurse, "I don't know who he is." It had been true, until now. The next day, she called a friend to watch Max and made her way to the Bright Path administrative office. She didn't text or call Ethan in advance. She couldn't. She didn't know what to say. But when she entered the glass-walled lobby and the receptionist asked, "Do you have an appointment with Mr. Ward?" Julia answered with a steady voice, "No, but I think I have something very important to tell him." The receptionist looked surprised, but within minutes, Julia was being led to Ethan's office. Her hands were sweating. Her stomach churned. When she stepped inside, Ethan looked up from his laptop. The moment their eyes met, she saw it. He knew something had shifted. He stood. "Julia, is everything all right?" She swallowed hard. "I think we need to talk. About something from the past." Ethan's face changed, slowly, cautiously. "Okay," he said. "Come in, please." She sat down and took a breath that felt like it would never end. And then she said it. "I think we've met before, years ago, and I think Max is your son." Ethan didn't speak right away. He sat very still in the leather chair across from her, eyes locked on Julia as if trying to determine whether he had heard her correctly or if his mind was playing tricks. The silence stretched out so long it began to press on Julia's chest, her heart pounding like a war drum. She forced herself to stay calm, her fingers clenched around the strap of her purse. She had practiced how to say it over and over the night before, but now that the words were out, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something massive, uncertain if it would open into peace or disaster. Ethan finally blinked and sat back in his chair, his voice quiet but firm. "Say that again." Julia took another breath, steadier this time. "We met once. It was a long time ago, at a fundraising event. You were working the registration table. I was helping out for my professor, Emma Ward." Recognition flashed in his eyes, slowly, painfully. "I remember that night," he said, barely above a whisper. Julia nodded. "We talked. We spent time together. Just that one night, I didn't know who you were. We never exchanged names. But I remembered your face and your voice." She hesitated, then added, "I found a letter from Emma yesterday. That's how I connected the dots. And when I saw Max next to Owen, I couldn't ignore it anymore." Ethan stood up and walked to the window, running a hand through his hair. He looked like a man who had just been told his entire life had a missing chapter. His back rose and fell with his breathing. Julia, he said, still facing the glass. Are you sure? I didn't plan this, she said quickly. I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm not even sure what this means. But yes, I'm sure. I don't need a DNA test to know. But if you want one, I'll do it. He turned to face her again, eyes glassy with the beginnings of something. Shock, maybe even sorrow. Why didn't you tell me? I couldn't, she said, voice shaking now. I didn't even know who you were until this week. After you said Max looked like Owen, I started remembering more. And I was terrified. You're someone important. Powerful. I thought if I told you, you'd take him away. His face changed instantly. I would never. I know, she interrupted softly. I know that now. But I didn't then. Ethan crossed the room and sat back down across from her, folding his hands on the desk. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he asked, What's Max like when he's not stacking leaves with Owen? The question caught her off guard. It wasn't about rights or custody. It wasn't a demand. She smiled despite herself. He's wild. He talks to birds. He loves peanut butter more than any human should. He can be moody in the mornings, but when he laughs, it fills the whole room. Ethan listened like he was absorbing every word. His throat moved as he swallowed. I miss so much. You didn't know, she said gently. And he's not missing anything. He's loved. You can still be part of his life if you want to. I do, he said instantly without hesitation. But I don't want to upend his world. Or yours. He knows you as Owen's dad. That's safe for now. He nodded. Let's keep it that way. For now. Until we figure out what this is. They sat in quiet agreement, the air between them no longer sharp with tension, but filled with a strange, raw understanding. I'll tell him when it's right, Julia said. Not today, maybe not for a while, but he'll know. And when he does, Ethan said, I'll be ready. Julia rose to her feet, suddenly tired in a way that felt like release. She reached into her purse and took out a photo, one she always carried. Max, around 6 months old, sitting in a tiny sweater her mother had knitted, grinning at nothing in particular. She handed it to Ethan. He's yours, she said simply. Ethan took the photo with trembling fingers. He stared at it like it was a gift he never knew he'd needed until this very second. As Julia turned to leave, Ethan stood, still holding the picture. Thank you, he said quietly. She paused at the door and glanced back. You're welcome, she said, and then she left, closing the door gently behind her, knowing the real door had only just begun to open. The days that followed were filled with a strange, quiet shift. On the surface, nothing had changed. Julia continued her daily routine, walking Max to the library for toddler reading time, preparing small meals from a limited budget, sending out resumes when Max napped. But underneath it all, her world felt different. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. She had told Ethan the truth, and now there was no going back. She hadn't heard from him in 4 days. She told herself she didn't expect to. He was likely still processing. Or maybe he had changed his mind about being involved. The thought twisted her stomach more than she cared to admit. She had spent 2 years building a life without a father for Max. But now knowing Ethan was out there, and knowing that he cared, made his silence feel like an absence, not just a pause. On the 5th day, her phone buzzed. Ethan Ward. Would you and Max like to come to the museum this Saturday? Owen's been asking for him. Julia stared at the screen for a full minute before answering. Julia. Yes, we'd love to. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Julia dressed Max in his warmest coat, the one with tiny bear ears on the hood, and packed a snack bag with crackers, apple slices, and juice boxes. She kept checking her reflection in the mirror. Not because she wanted to impress Ethan, but because she felt nervous in a way that made her question herself. This wasn't a date. This wasn't even a family outing. It was something stranger, more delicate. When they arrived at the museum entrance, Ethan and Owen were already waiting outside. Ethan was crouched beside his son, tying the laces on his little sneakers, his face soft with patience. It struck Julia again how natural he was with Owen. Not performative, not practiced, just present. Hi, she said, walking up with Max on her hip. Ethan stood and smiled. Hey, you made it. Owen cheered when he saw Max. You came. I told Daddy you would, Julia laughed. He missed you too. Inside, the museum was alive with families, school exhibits, dinosaur skeletons, children's hands pressed against glass enclosures. Max walked beside Owen, their steps uneven but enthusiastic. Little boys united by shared excitement. Julia and Ethan followed, keeping their distance, occasionally catching each other's eye. At one point, Max looked up at a large painting of a tree and turned to Ethan. "Big tree," he said solemnly, pointing. Ethan knelt beside him. "That's called a redwood. They're some of the tallest trees in the world." "Tall like you," Max replied. Ethan smiled and looked up at Julia, surprised by the comment. Julia gave a small shrug, her throat tightening. They stopped for snacks in the museum cafe. The boys munched on apple slices while Ethan leaned forward and asked gently, "Can I tell you something?" Julia nodded. "I keep looking for pieces of me in him. I know I shouldn't. He's already a whole person. He's yours. But when he smiles, when he says things like that, I feel like I'm watching something I missed that I don't want to miss again." Julia didn't speak right away. She reached across the table and gently tapped his wrist. "You're not taking anything from me by feeling that. I've had him all to myself for 2 years. He deserves to know more, and so do you." Ethan exhaled. "I don't want to push." "You're not," she said. "You're here. That means more than you know." After lunch, they walked through the quiet nature wing. The boys held hands now, tired but content. Julia watched as Ethan reached down and lifted Max up when he stumbled. Max giggled and nestled into his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Julia felt something she hadn't in a long time. Relief. When they said goodbye, Ethan hesitated. "Would it be all right if we planned another day? Just the three of us? Maybe somewhere quieter?" Julia looked at him, truly looked, not as a stranger from a forgotten night, but as someone slowly earning his place. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd like that." As she strapped Max into his car seat later, the boy yawned and mumbled, "Daddy's nice." Julia froze. "Who?" she asked carefully. Max blinked, half asleep. "Owen's daddy. He smells like sunshine." She smiled through sudden tears. "Yeah," she whispered, brushing his hair back. "He really does." It was almost 2 weeks later when Julia received a simple text from Ethan that made her heart race. "Ethan Ward, would you come to the house this weekend? Just dinner. Just us. Nothing complicated." She stared at it for a moment, unsure of what just us meant anymore. But the more she thought about it, the more she understood. He wasn't rushing toward anything. He was simply creating space. For Max. For her. For the undefined possibility between all of them. She agreed, and on Saturday evening, just as the sky melted into a soft lavender hue, she found herself holding Max's hand on the front steps of a modern but warm-looking home nestled in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. Ethan answered the door before she could even knock. He wasn't in a suit this time, just jeans and a dark blue sweater, sleeves pushed to his elbows, looking more like a man unwinding from a long week than the polished CEO she'd seen online. "You made it," he said with a gentle smile. "Hi," she replied, suddenly nervous. "I hope this isn't too strange." "It's not," he said quickly. "It's good. Come in." The house smelled like rosemary chicken and fresh bread. Owen ran into the hallway as soon as they stepped inside, arms outstretched toward Max like they were old friends reuniting after a long absence. Within seconds, the boys were chasing each other down the hallway, laughter bouncing off the walls like music. Dinner was set in the dining room, candles flickering gently on a table already arranged with plates, glasses, and a bowl of salad in the center. Julia was impressed and surprised. "You cooked?" "I did," Ethan said, a little sheepishly. "I Googled how to roast chicken without ruining everything. Hopefully it worked." She laughed and it eased some of the tension in her shoulders. They sat, the boys at one end of the table, distracted with pasta and juice, while Julia and Ethan ate slowly, quietly, like people trying to read between the lines of their own thoughts. Halfway through the meal, Ethan reached into a small drawer in the hutch beside the table and pulled out a photo. He slid it across to Julia. It was Max's photo, the one she had given him, but now it sat in a simple black frame, placed beside a photo of Owen on the sideboard behind him. "I didn't want to wait to do this until things were official or formal," he said. "I just wanted you to know I've already made space for him. For both of you." Julia stared at the frame. Her throat tightened. She hadn't cried in front of Ethan before, but now she felt it coming. I don't know what this will look like in the long run, she admitted. I don't know if we're supposed to be a family, or if we're just two people with one unexpected connection. Ethan shook his head. No, he said gently. We're not just anything. We're here. You're here. That means something. I'm not asking for labels or answers right now. Just time. Time to be in Max's life. Time to learn how to do this with you. Julia looked up, eyes glassy but steady. You already are. After dinner, they all moved to the living room. The boys sprawled on the carpet with blocks and books while Julia and Ethan sat on the couch. Closer than before, but not touching. There was no tension, only understanding. A kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled. Max eventually climbed into Ethan's lap with no hesitation. He yawned once, then curled against his chest, completely at peace. Julia watched as Ethan instinctively wrapped his arm around him, resting his chin lightly on the boy's curls. She had never seen Max look so safe with another person, and maybe she thought this was what safety could look like. Not perfection, not predictability, but this. Two boys with full bellies, one man quietly learning to love a son he didn't know he had, and a woman letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something she no longer had to survive alone. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Ethan looked at her across Max's sleeping body and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a chance." She nodded once, a small smile tugging at her lips. You're not the only one who needed one. Spring came quietly that year, slipping into the city like a secret. The parks bloomed earlier than expected. The chill in the air gave way to sunlight, and people began walking a little slower, letting themselves breathe again. For Julia, it felt like the first real spring in a long time. Not just a change in weather, but a change in her life. A thawing of everything that had been frozen by fear, shame, and solitude. It had been 3 months since that dinner at Ethan's house. 3 months of cautious steps and small moments that meant more than either of them dared say out loud. Ethan had become part of Max's life without taking it over. He'd show up for playground mornings, pick him up from story time, drop off bags of groceries on Fridays without needing to be thanked. Julia hadn't expected someone like him to adapt to her world, but he hadn't tried to change it. He'd simply added to it, steadily, quietly, like a man building trust one brick at a time. Max now called him Ethan. Not quite Ethan, but close enough. And when Max got tired, he often reached for his hand instead of Julia's. The first time it happened, she'd felt something unexpected. Not jealousy, but relief. He's not alone anymore, she thought, and neither am I. That weekend, Ethan invited them both to a spring fair at one of the Bright Path schools. It was a sunny Saturday, the air thick with the smell of kettle corn and grass. Children screamed with joy on bouncy castles, face paint smeared across cheeks, and music floated over loudspeakers from a high school jazz band. Max rode a small carousel with Owen, both boys giggling hysterically every time their horses dipped. Julia stood by the edge, her arms folded, watching them like someone witnessing a tiny miracle. Ethan joined her, holding 2 lemonades, offering her one without a word. He loves it, Julia said, nodding toward Max. So does Owen, Ethan replied. They look more like brothers every day. They are brothers, she said softly, even if they don't know how yet. He nodded, taking a sip of his drink. Do you ever think about telling Max? She didn't answer right away. I do, all the time. But I think he already knows, in his own way. Kids don't need words to recognize love. Ethan turned toward her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. I've been thinking about this a lot. I wanted to talk to you before making any decisions. Julia hesitated before taking it. She opened it and scanned the first line. Legal language. Custody agreement. I'm not asking to take him, Ethan said quickly. This isn't about court or rights. I just want to make it official. I want Max to know when he's ready that I chose to be his father. Not because I had to, but because I love him. And I want him protected. If anything ever happened to me, I'd want him taken care of. Officially. Julia blinked rapidly, then looked up at him. This isn't what I expected, she whispered. I know, but I'm not here to rewrite your life. I just want to share it with both of you. The carousel slowed. Max waved at them with his sticky little hand, beaming. Okay, Julia said, her voice thick with emotion. Let's do it. Together. Later that evening, they sat on the steps of Ethan's porch. Max had fallen asleep in his arms, mouth open, hands curled into tiny fists against Ethan's chest. Julia leaned against the railing, quiet, full. I used to think survival was the best I could hope for, she said. But now, I think I was meant for more than just getting through. Ethan looked at her with that steady, open gaze she had come to trust. You were meant for love, he said. So was Max, and so was I. She nodded slowly as the sun dipped low on the horizon. No papers, no promises, no grand declarations. Just this, a boy, once lost, a woman, once broken, and a man once grieving, all beginning again, together. As the author, I believe the ending of this story captures something quietly profound, the idea that love doesn't always arrive the way we expect it, but when it does, it has the power to heal more than just one broken. Pastoring, Julia's journey from fear and isolation to trust and emotional safety is not a fairy tale. It's hard won. Ethan's evolution from a grieving widower to a present, intentional father shows that redemption can come in the form of responsibility, not grand gestures. What makes this ending powerful is its restraint. There's no sudden wedding, no instant happily ever after. Just the real beginnings of something authentic, a man earning his place, a woman letting herself hope again, and a child who, without knowing it, brought two lost people back to life. The story doesn't shout, it whispers about healing, about timing, about quiet love that grows not through fantasy, but through everyday choice. To me, that's the most beautiful kind of ending, one that feels true,